Hi, and welcome everyone. You are listening to Echo Colorado. I am Ian Tafoya.
And I'm Trisha Garcia Nelson. This is your Colorado environmental news and to-dos in 15 minutes or less.
So, Patricia, we've had some exciting last few months at the legislature. We finally had it come to a close just a couple weeks ago. You ready to do an environmental justice legislative roundup with me?
Absolutely, I am.
Where should we start? Should we start with SB 200?
Yes, I think this legislative session that was the hot topic throughout the season.
No doubt. I had the opportunity to do an 11 city tour right when Governor Polis was talking about vetoing this critical piece of legislation. And I could tell you from here to southern Colorado to the western slope and the Front Range, people were definitely hot on the fact that we had sent the legislature and our governor with a mandate to take climate action immediately. And yet we continue to apparently hit roadblocks when it comes to really making the industries do their part.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good reminder that voting along party lines does not guarantee that people are going to put the environment and people first. And so we really need to take a look at who are the players in the game and which team they're actually playing for.
Yeah, the best way that you all can do that is to go into the links and find out the bill number, which we have linked for you. You can go on there, find out who your legislator is. You can find out how they voted on critical legislation. It's a skill that if you practice here, you can use for any piece of legislation on the Colorado Legislator website.
Yeah, and I think now that our representatives are no longer in session, it'll be a good time to have a less heated conversation with them and ask them the hard questions and really hold them accountable for all the votes that they made this season.
I'll tell you one of the things that I thought was the coolest was that we saw the community willing to take the pressure to the leaders. I know that the community gathered to flyer Jared Polis's neighborhood. They had a big time march through the city of Boulder around his house, kind of trying to bring it all together. You and I had the chance to speak at that. I mean, wasn't it great to see? I mean, I see, like, for example, like the Sunrise Movement marching on Nancy Pelosi's house. I makes me feel like we're not alone in escalating tactics because the problem is just so great.
Right. And I think the fact that it's the people that are coming and organizing these things are getting younger and younger. I think it really speaks to the urgency because they realize that all the messes that we're leaving behind, they're going to be responsible for cleaning them up.
Well, I think thanks to all that great pressure from the public, from you, the listeners, we just, first of all, I want to say thank you for tuning in and continuing to tune in. We want to know it is making a difference. In fact, this pressure got us 13 out of the 16 parts of the bill. And what's kind of interesting is even though we hit a roadblock with SB 200, we were able to move critical components of this into a bill called 1266, which is an environmental justice for disproportionately impacted communities bill. What that tells me, Patricia, is that when we lead with justice, when we lead with climate justice, when we lead with environmental justice, we win. Well, here are just some critical parts of it that made it in of the 13 of 16. We're going to see a 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from the oil and gas sector by 2030, but it doesn't include the oil and gas that we export, which we know is critically important, right? Just because we pull it out of the ground here and it goes and gets burned somewhere else, I feel like ultimately we're culpable for that, right? And that accounts for more emissions than all the other in-state sectors combined, the oil and gas we're exporting. So we got to figure that out. We also know that it only applies to leaks and other emissions that are directly involved in production, not the burning itself. And we did get to see 80% reductions in greenhouse gases from utilities in the state by 2030, but we're going to have to fight at the Public Utilities Commission to make sure that's true. Because what we've seen here, right, is that the legislators put forward goals and we haven't necessarily seen them implemented by the governor. In fact, he's had to be sued over many of them. But one that I was kind of excited about was this 20% reductions in the manufacturing sector by 2030. The manufacturing sector, this industrial sector, when it's producing greenhouse gases, it's often also producing other harmful toxins. And so if we can get some rulemakings in action and we can start reducing those greenhouse gases, we should see what they call co-benefits, things that are also benefits that are related to that reduction. The other thing I'd say is the bill doesn't have transportation or buildings in it. And we know that transportation has been the largest sector of our emissions to date now here in the Front Range. And so, we're going to have to do more. I know there are some transportation rulemakings that are coming up here. There's actually been some kind of back and forth about whether they're going to go to the Air Quality Control Commission or the Transportation Commission. I definitely think it's an issue that we should have on here.
The work is never done, but at least the scope of the work is going to get a lot smaller because we did have these critical pieces of the bill that were passed this legislative session. So the next time around, we're not going to have to focus on all of the pieces that we want to have changed and just focus more on smaller pieces. And I think that'll be easier for everybody.
Totally. And so we took those major components, right, and we moved them into House Bill 1266. The best way I could describe it to you all is, so this is the way the legislative process works. You can amend, you can pull out, you can transfer things, but rest assured that Representative Dominique Jackson, who brought forward both of these bills, used the rules for frontline communities this time. We were able to advance it to ensure that those Democrats, that the governor weren't able to kill this on calendar, and then we were able to pick up some of these wins. Of course, we're going to have to come back for transportation and more of this oil and gas that's being burned, but it's better if we can get a majority of it than to be left with nothing. 1266 was called the environmental justice for disproportionate impacted communities. It's a very huge victory for frontline communities. Why? Because it creates an environmental justice ombudsman and a task force that will work with disproportionately impacted communities to fix environmental justice statewide by examining community engagement and decision-making processes. I mean, we all know how difficult at times it can be even to participate in the system it is. I think a lot of us have really good ideas. One idea, for example, that I have is during the pandemic, you could go to the DMV and they could text you when it was your turn. Please tell me why they can't do that at the Public Utilities Commission or the Water Quality Control Commission.
Or the COGCC or CDPHE. They have all these resources at the disposal. And so, I really hope that this is going to be, especially with Zoom, for so long, they told us that we could not do remote testimony. For years and years and years, they said we could not testify remotely. And then the pandemic happens, and then all of a sudden we have the capability, and who knew we already had the infrastructure to be able to do that.
No, I mean, I agree with you 100%. We have to really be watching how we come back from COVID and what they try to take away that has been so successful. We definitely need to fight for. Um, I think this is a good pivot for a bill that I am very excited about, a bill that I worked on with the Colorado Latino Forum 3 years ago, regulating air toxics, House Bill 1189. What this bill would do is require polluting facilities like Suncor in Commerce City, the Phillips 66 terminal. If you don't know what a terminal is, it means there's a big gas pipeline that terminates, and they use that as a facility where they transfer the fuel into vehicles. There's lots of spilling, there's lots of emissions, and it's causing sincere air quality issues and toxics going into the community in Commerce City. So you have a Phillips 66 terminal, which is literally across the street from Suncor. You have a Sinclair terminal, which is just about a mile and a half away from Suncor. So you have 3 of these major facilities that are putting out harmful chemicals: hydrogen cyanide, which was used in the gas chambers during the Holocaust, hydrogen sulfide, and benzene. These are all very dangerous chemicals. Benzene does not have a single safe limit. I know that you're very familiar with benzene, Patricia, because that's what you were concerned about and continue to be concerned about with these drilling
Absolutely.
wells in Bella
Yeah.
Romero. And one last one, Goodrich Carbon in Pueblo, right? I had a chance to go down there with Jaime Valdez, visit with him. We did a press conference from in front of it, actually. And just across the road, a couple blocks, of course, an elementary school of brown kids. It is all too common and the norm across the state of Colorado with this industry. Now we're finally going to get publicly reported pollution, real-time monitoring about what is coming off the fence line. And this is critical in the playbook about figuring out the comprehensive pollution in this area. If you have a monitor at your house, that's great. But if you don't have a monitor at a facility, then they could just blame another facility.
Exactly. And again, this is another example of something that was said that could not be done. There was no way that we could possibly do it. But I think that that is the biggest part of the accountability, is being able to report things as they happen, as opposed to telling you 3 weeks later, oh, by the way, there was a leak. We were just now telling you about it because we just now looked over the data, which is what happened here at Bella Romero.
One of the interesting things that I thought I found out as working on these bills is that the Attorney General, the people who are responsible for going after polluters, both CDPHE and the Attorney General's office, for fines, for example. Well, it was all based on self-reporting. So if you made a mistake, you might wait 3 or 4 days and then be like, oh, we have a mistake. And then you can go back and get those other 4 days, right? Because you just didn't know. You were, self-reporting. So now we'll have a real-time idea of when the pollution is happening. And we, the advocates, Patricia, us, we worked to force the increase in fines, the cost per day. And so we're hopeful to see that these funds will increase, that we'll see more clamping down on these industries, and that community task force that we're talking about with this environmental justice ombudsman, those people are going to get to decide where that money's going to go. And it's going to go back into the community. No more sending money back to the polluters themselves.
Do we know what the makeup will be of that task force? Because sometimes, they'll say there's a task force and really it's just somebody from this agency that's going to come talk to you and write down some notes.
Well, I do know that there are going to be people who are required to come from disproportionately impacted communities. I do know that the NAACP fought to include more people from the community around the state. And I do know that nonprofits and other environmental justice advocates will have their seat at the table. I think we're going to have to be careful, you're right, in that selection process and protesting individuals that aren't there for the real interest of the spirit of the law or for the spirit of our people.
As we close up this legislative session, it's a good time to give your lawmakers a call and let them know what your priorities are for this next year. You can look up who your state representatives are and how they voted on these bills. Give them a call to let them know that you support regulating greenhouse gas emissions for the fossil fuel industry and that you want corporate polluters to be held accountable for the damage that they are doing to frontline communities.
Now is the time to get on the phone. Now is the time to build that relationship. Who knows where it could go? Some relationships, we've had negative relationships with legislators, and after many conversations, maybe they change their tune as more community
Mhm.
members join in, right? And so what we do know is that the government, in my opinion, the government works best when it's listening and the people are talking. And that's why we're doing our best to make it easier for people to engage, to find information, and to participate. And we have to fight to change the rules in the government so that they're bent in our favor and not the industry anymore.
Right. And I think there was something else that you wanted to talk about when it came to our kind of following up on our last episode about the anti degradation water rules.
Yeah, so last week at the Water Quality Control Commission, our last episode was about whether they were going to roll back rules that protect rivers from degradation. And we seem to be on track, like it was a done deal. But in total, the community came together. We turned in more than 6,000 petitions. We had, I think, 100 people sign up for public comment. I know I saw at least 60 of them. The meeting went so long that it went into another day. And that made me nervous, right? Because sometimes it's easier to make a decision when the room's not packed, right? When people have gone about their day and they put their time in. But we won. We, the people, won. This is something that is so exciting for me to see because when it comes to water, we can accept less, of course. But
Absolutely.
so often we see these procedural rules not work out in the favor of frontline groups. And in this instance, it did.
Right. And I really feel like this kind of result will give communities that are being impacted some hope, but also knowing that there's other communities that support them and it gives them a chance to raise their voice. And I think that through the show that we're doing, we also give those communities the space that they need to tell their stories and to be heard.
It's dope. And I wish that we could take all the credit for Echo Colorado, but I do know for sure that we were the only people who are broadcasting the information in Espanol in an easy and digestible way for our community. So, where does that leave us? I think we got our 15 minutes in, and we want to thank everybody for tuning again to Echo Colorado. I am Ian Thomas DeFoya,
I'm Trisha Garcia Nelson.
and you are listening to your environmental news and to-dos in 15 minutes or less.